The credit union smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, that sharp, lemony kind that always makes my eyes water. And I was standing there in my sensible black loafers with my red leather checkbook cover tucked under my arm like it could keep me steady, when my daughter leaned over the counter and said loud enough for the young teller to flinch, "Old people don't need money." She smiled when she said it, like it was a clever joke, and not a sentence that could rearrange a mother's insides. I was 64 then, widowed, living alone in a 2-bedroom condo on the quieter side of Maple Ridge, Ontario, close enough to my grandchildren to be useful, far enough to pretend I had my own life. And my daughter, Jenna, was 38, with perfect hair, and that restless energy people get when they're always chasing the next fix for a problem they helped create. The teller's acrylic nails clicked against her keyboard, the fluorescent lights hummed, and I watched Jenna's hand slide across the counter toward the withdrawal form, like she was reaching for something that already belonged to her. I remember thinking, in a strange calm that didn't match the heat in my face, when did she start talking about me like I was already gone? It had been Jenna's idea to handle the errands that morning. She'd picked me up in her SUV with the leather seats that always smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener and French fries, and she'd chattered all the way there about how we were going to get our ducks in a row. If you're a woman my age, you probably know that tone. Bright, bossy, almost cheerful, like you're being invited to a party you didn't ask for. We'd been at the bank just 2 weeks earlier, too, when she'd insisted we move everything to one place for simplicity. I'd let her, partly because I was tired, partly because my husband, Tom, used to handle anything that involved forms and fine print, and partly because Jenna was my child, and I still had that old reflex to believe that if she sounded confident, she must be right. That morning at the credit union, she had a folder in her purse. Pink, of course, because Jenna always chose things that looked harmless. And inside were printouts of my retirement account, my savings, and a typed list titled Plan. She'd created it like a little project at work, bold headings, bullet points, the whole thing. The plan, as it turned out, was for me to withdraw $20,000 from my RRSP and loan it to her so she could bridge a few months of rent, pay off the last of her credit cards, and keep the boutique she'd opened 6 months earlier from closing. She called the boutique her dream, which sounded noble until you looked at the numbers. The rent was too high, the inventory sat untouched, and Jenna had been giving discounts to friends like that counted as marketing. When I hesitated, she'd pressed her lips together in that familiar way, the one that used to mean a tantrum was coming when she was 6, and she'd said, "Mom, you have it. You're fine. You don't even do anything." Then, because the teller asked why the withdrawal was so large and wanted to speak directly to me, Jenna tossed out that line, "Old people don't need money." The teller looked up at me then, and I swear, in that 1 second, she saw what Jenna didn't. A woman who had worked 40 years, who had nursed a husband through cancer, who had raised 2 kids on a tight budget, who had learned to stretch a pound of ground beef into spaghetti for 3 nights, and who knew exactly what money meant. Not yachts and designer bags, just heat in winter and dignity when your body starts to betray you. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out at first. I could feel Jenna's eyes on me, daring me to disagree, and I did what I'd done too many times in my life. I smoothed my face, swallowed the hurt, and asked for a smaller amount. 5,000, I said, my voice thin. Jenna's head snapped toward me. The teller nodded, relieved, and slid the papers toward me to sign. Jenna's knee bounced beside mine on the waiting bench, a little metronome of impatience. "That won't do anything," she muttered. "It's fine," I said, and my hand shook as I signed, because part of me already knew I was buying time, not peace. On the drive back, Jenna kept talking, but it was like listening through water. She told me I was lucky because I had Tom's life insurance. Lucky because the condo was paid off. Lucky because I didn't have to work anymore. She said lucky the way some people say spoiled, like my comfort was an insult to her struggle. I stared out the window at the strip mall parking lots and the damp trees, and thought about the first winter after Tom died, when I'd sat in my kitchen in my robe with the radio on low, counting out bills, terrified I'd do something wrong and lose the only steady thing I had left. That fear of making the wrong move had been living in my bones ever since. When Jenna dropped me off, she hugged me at the door, quick and tight like a transaction, and said, "Thanks, Mom, I'll pay you back. Don't be weird about it." Then she drove away, and the sudden quiet in my condo felt like someone had turned off the oxygen. My place was modest, but it was mine. Beige carpet, a faded blue couch, the little dining table Tom and I bought at a yard sale and refinished ourselves, the framed photo of our wedding, where my hair was a dark auburn instead of the soft gray it had become. I went straight to the kitchen drawer where I kept the checkbook cover, the red leather one, scuffed at the corners, with Tom's handwriting still faintly pressed into the inside pocket from years of checks he'd slid in there. It wasn't a fancy thing. We'd gotten it free when we opened our first joint account back in the 80s, but it had been in my hands through every season of our life. Mortgage payments, daycare fees, camping trips, funeral costs for Tom's mother, braces for Jenna, and then, later, the oncology bills that no one warns you about even in a country where you think you're covered. I held it like it was warm. The leather smelled faintly of old paper and that dusty scent of time, and for a second I was back in our old house, Tom at the table with his reading glasses on, tapping the checkbook with his pen and saying, "Okay, Di, let's make sure we don't bounce anything. Banks don't care if you're tired." That memory hit me so hard I had to lean against the counter. Maybe you've had a moment like that where an ordinary object suddenly becomes a doorway. I hadn't cried at the bank. I hadn't cried in the car. But with that checkbook cover in my hand, the tears came quietly, like a leak you only notice when the floor is already damp. I made tea and sat at the table and stared at the $5,000 withdrawal receipt Jenna had stuffed into my purse like a grocery coupon. The number looked blunt on the paper, 5,000. I thought about how many hours I'd worked at the dental office to earn that much back when Jenna was small, how many evenings I'd stayed late filing charts because the younger hygienists wanted to go out, how many times I'd bought the cheaper cereal so my kids could have the name brand. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I got curious. Not in a dramatic way, not in a gotcha way. More like an exhausted woman finally deciding to stop guessing and start checking. I turned on my laptop, slow old thing, fan wheezing like it had arthritis, and logged into my online banking. Jenna had helped me set it up last year because I'd gotten locked out after too many wrong passwords. She'd insisted it was easier if she had access too, in case of emergencies. At the time, That sounded like love. Now, with her voice still in my ears, old people don't need money, I felt my spine stiffen in a way that surprised me. I clicked through the recent transactions. At first, everything looked normal. Condo fees, utilities, my groceries at Food Basics, a donation to the local animal shelter I always sent in December because Tom loved dogs. Then I saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $200 labeled e-transfer, sent to an email address that wasn't mine. I clicked back. There were more. 150 here, 300 there, always small enough to slide under the radar, always spaced out like someone who didn't want a pattern to show. My mouth went dry. I pulled out a notepad, not a spiral notebook, just a plain legal pad I used for grocery lists, and wrote the dates down one by one, my hand steady in a way my heart was not. Feelings can make you doubt yourself, I thought, but numbers sit there like stones. The transfers went back 6 months. The total, when I added it up with my old-fashioned calculator, was $4,830, almost what Jenna had just taken from me in one go. I stared at that total until the digits blurred. Then I did what any mother does when the truth is too ugly to hold all at once. I tried to make it make sense. Maybe she'd accidentally used my account. Maybe she meant to ask and forgot. Maybe I'd told her yes and didn't remember. There's a special kind of shame that comes with wondering if your own memory is starting to slip. It makes you quiet. It makes you easier to manage. It makes you want to hand over control just to stop the anxiety. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my bed, the sheets cool against my legs, listening to the fridge click on and off and the distant whoosh of cars on the highway, and I replayed little moments from the past year like I was reviewing security footage. Jenna insisting she needed my login just once. Jenna telling me she'd handle my mail when I'd been sick with the flu. Jenna making a joke at Thanksgiving about how I should spend it while you can, like my money was a candle that should be burned for the benefit of anyone nearby. Around 3 a.m., I got up and went into the living room and opened the red checkbook cover again, not to write a check but to anchor myself. Tom's handwriting on the old register pages was neat, careful. He used to draw little boxes around the totals, like he was building fences to keep our life safe. I pressed my thumb into the leather and whispered, "Tom, I don't know what I'm doing." The apartment was silent, but in my head I could almost hear him. "You're doing it. You're looking." The next morning, Jenna texted me like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. Need you to watch the kids Saturday. I have inventory delivery. Also, can you transfer me the rest of that money today? The boutique account is overdrawn." My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen, my thumbs hovering. Maybe you've sat with a phone in your hand like that, feeling your whole history with someone vibrating behind a single message. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a shower, put on a clean sweater, and did something that felt both ridiculous and brave. I drove myself back to the credit union. The parking lot was half empty, the sky flat and gray, and my hands were cold on the steering wheel, even though the heat was on. Inside, the same burnt coffee smell greeted me. I asked to speak with a financial services officer, someone who could explain the transfers. They seated me in a small office with frosted glass walls. A woman named Mary Ann came in, early 40s, kind eyes, sensible ponytail, a name tag clipped to her cardigan. She didn't talk to me like I was fragile. She talked to me like I was a customer. That alone was a small mercy. I slid my legal pad across the desk with the dates and amounts written down. "I think someone has been sending money out of my account," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Marianne nodded slowly. "Let's take a look," she said, fingers moving quickly on her keyboard, the screen reflected in her glasses. "These e-transfers were set up using your online banking access," she said after a minute. "They were initiated from a device associated with your account." "What device?" I asked. Marianne paused. "We can see the type," she said carefully. "It looks like a phone, an iPhone, based on the user agent." My cheeks burned. Jenna had an iPhone. I had a cheap Android that I barely knew how to silence. Marianne looked at me gently. "Do you share your login with anyone?" she asked. That question landed like a pebble in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no, because saying yes felt like admitting I'd been foolish. But something in me was done with pretending. "My daughter," I said. "She set it up." Marianne didn't gasp or judge. She nodded like she'd heard this story before, and that both comforted and horrified me. "Okay," she said. "First, we can reset your online banking credentials today. We can also put a note on your file that no one is authorized to transact on your behalf unless there's a formal power of attorney on record. And for the transfers that weren't authorized by you, we can start an investigation." Investigation. The word sounded official, solid, like something you could point to. My throat tightened again. "Will she get in trouble?" I asked, because even then, with the evidence sitting between us, my first instinct was to protect Jenna from consequences. Marianne's eyes held mine. "Mrs. Hart," she said, using my last name like I was someone worth respect. "Our job is to protect the account holder, not the person taking advantage." I swallowed. I nodded. "Start it," I said. Marianne printed pages, transaction histories, account access logs, a form titled "Dispute of Unauthorized Electronic Transfer." She slid them to me with a pen. My hand trembled as I signed, but it wasn't the same tremble as yesterday. Yesterday was shame. Today was resolve. When I left, Marianne walked me to the door and said, "If anyone calls asking why access changed, we can only speak to you. That's the policy." Policy. Another word I clung to. Outside, the air was crisp, and I sat in my car for a minute and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, breathing. Then a memory flickered, triggered by the smell of coffee clinging to my sweater from the credit union. Tom and I in our first apartment, a tiny place above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon buns. We'd been broke, truly broke, the kind where you count coins for laundry. Tom had poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and said, "One day we'll have a little cushion." He'd smiled like he was promising me a beach house. I'd laughed and said, "I just want to pay the hydro bill without sweating." That was our dream, quiet safety, not luxury, not a boutique, just a life where we didn't have to beg. Back then, money meant freedom from fear. Now, apparently, it meant something else to Jenna, entitlement. When I got home, my phone was already buzzing. Jenna called twice. I didn't answer. She texted, "Mom, hello?" Then, "Did you do the transfer?" Then, "Why are you being like this?" I put the phone face down on the table like Marianne had shown me, and I opened the red checkbook cover again. I slid the printed transaction sheets into it, tucking them behind the old check register pages like I was placing something dangerous inside a familiar container. The checkbook cover became my little portable truth. It sat there, red against the beige tabletop, and I realized I'd been living for months on Jenna's version of events, her urgency, her explanations, her just this once, instead of my own record. That afternoon, I called my family doctor's office and made an appointment for a cognitive assessment. That might sound extreme, but listen, when someone starts hinting that you're forgetful, when they start talking around you like you're not the decision maker, you begin to doubt your own mind. I wanted something objective, something in writing. My doctor, Dr. Singh, had known me for years. When I told the receptionist I needed a full evaluation, she sounded surprised, but she booked me in. 2 days later, I sat in the exam room under harsh lights, the paper crinkling beneath me, and I answered questions about dates and words and drawings of clocks. Dr. Singh watched me with that calm, professional face. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Diane, you are not showing signs of impairment." Relief washed through me so fast I almost laughed. Then he added, "But I'm concerned about why you felt you needed this." I hesitated, then told him the truth. Jenna, the transfers, the bank, the comment. Dr. Singh's mouth tightened in a way that made him look older. "Financial pressure can be a form of abuse," he said gently, "especially when it's paired with undermining your confidence." He typed something into my chart. "I'm going to document that you requested this assessment due to concerns about coercion. If you ever need it, that note will be there." Document. Note. There. Again, it felt like laying bricks under my feet. That night, Jenna came to my condo unannounced. I heard her heels in the hallway before she knocked, that sharp clack that always made me think of impatience. I opened the door, and she swept in like she lived there, her perfume, something expensive and floral, filling the entryway. "Why aren't you answering?" she demanded, tossing her purse onto the chair like it was a prop. Her eyes flicked around, taking inventory. My quiet living room, the photo of Tom, the throw blanket on the couch. "I've been busy," I said, which was true, but not in the way she meant. She crossed her arms. "Did you go back to the bank?" she asked. I didn't respond fast enough, and her face sharpened. "Oh my God," she said, "you did. Mom, what are you doing? You're going to mess everything up." "What exactly am I messing up?" I asked, and my own voice startled me. It wasn't loud, it was just level. Jenna blinked. "My store," she said, like that explained everything. "You know what's at stake. You know I'm trying." "And you know what's at stake for me," I said. "My savings, my retirement, my ability to pay for my own care someday." Jenna rolled her eyes. "Care," she scoffed. "Mom, you're not going to need that. You're fine. You sit here all day watching those murder shows and knitting. You have plenty. Old people don't need money." There it was again in my living room this time, tossed like a crumb to a pigeon. My cheeks went hot, but I didn't back up. "Don't say that in my home," I said quietly. Jenna laughed, a short burst. "Why? Because it hurts your feelings?" "Mom, this isn't about feelings. This is about reality." I took a breath. "Reality is that someone has been transferring money out of my account for months," I said, "and the bank is investigating." The word investigation made her freeze for half a second. Then her face rearranged into outrage. "Are you accusing me?" she snapped. "I helped you. You can barely log into your email. I did you a favor." "Helping doesn't include taking," I said. Jenna's eyes narrowed. "You're being manipulated," she said, shifting tactics fast. "Who put this in your head? Marianne at the bank? Your neighbor? You've always been so gullible." That old shame tried to rise again, the instinct to prove I wasn't stupid, to explain myself. But I remembered Dr. Singh's note, Mary Ann's policy, the pages in my red checkbook cover. No one put it in my head, I said. I looked at my account. Jenna's jaw clenched. So what, you're going to ruin my life over a few transfers? A few, like $4,000 was spare change, like my fear didn't count. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm stopping it. Jenna stared at me, then suddenly softened, reaching for my hand like she'd done when she was little and wanted a cookie before dinner. Mom, she said, voice syrupy, I'm stressed. I'm scared. I'm doing this for the kids. You want your grandkids to suffer? Maybe you've had someone weaponize love like that, wrapping guilt around you like a scarf you didn't ask for. My stomach twisted because, of course, I loved my grandkids. Of course, I didn't want them to suffer. But I thought of Tom again, how he used to say, our job is to raise kids, not keep rescuing adults. He wasn't a cold man. He was practical. He believed in consequences. I pulled my hand back. Jenna, I said, I'll help the kids in ways that make sense. I'll buy groceries. I'll pay for a school trip if they ask me directly. But I'm not handing over large sums without clear terms, and I'm not sharing my banking access anymore. Jenna's face hardened. So you're choosing money over your own daughter, she said, and the accusation hung in the air like smoke. No, I said, and my voice trembled just a little. I'm choosing reality over panic. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels striking the hallway like punctuation. The next day, the storm came in through my phone. Voicemails, texts. Jenna's husband, my son-in-law Kyle, messaged me too, which surprised me because Kyle usually stayed out of Jenna's fights. Hey, Diane, he wrote. Jenna's upset. Can we talk? She says you're accusing her of theft. Theft. There was the word no one wanted to say out loud. I didn't answer him right away either. Instead, I did something that felt like stepping onto a new road. I went to the community center's legal clinic. It ran once a week, advertised on a flyer near the library. Free legal advice for seniors. I'd walked past that flyer a dozen times and never imagined I'd need it. The clinic was held in a small room that smelled like photocopier toner and old carpet. A young lawyer named Priya sat across from me, her hair in a neat bun, her eyes sharp but kind. I opened the red checkbook cover and slid out my papers, the bank printouts, the list of transfers, Dr. Singh's assessment note. I'm not trying to punish her, I said immediately, because that's what mothers say, even when their daughters are digging into their retirement like it's a purse left unattended. I just need to protect myself. Priya nodded. Protection is not punishment, she said. Tell me what's happening. I told her everything, the boutique, the withdrawals, Jenna's access, the comment at the credit union. Priya's pen moved steadily as she took notes. Has your daughter mentioned power of attorney or guardianship? She asked. I hesitated. She's been hinting, I said, saying it would be easier if she managed things, saying I forget. Priya's mouth tightened. Sometimes when access gets cut off, people escalate, she said. They try to make it official. She explained the difference between power of attorney and guardianship in plain language. No drama. Power of attorney was something I could choose, something I could limit. Guardianship, what the law here calls guardianship of property, was a court appointment that removed control from me. It's not granted lightly, Priya said, but adult children do try. My heart thudded. Could she do that? I asked. Priya looked at my papers. With your assessment note and your clear records, it would be difficult, she said. But if she files, you'd need to respond. Then she said something that stuck with me. The court cares about evidence, not family narratives. Family narratives. That was Jenna's territory. Stories, tears, urgency, painting herself as the hero and me as the obstacle. Evidence was mine now. Priya helped me draft a letter to the credit union formally revoking any informal authorization Jenna might claim. She also suggested I change my mailing address back to my condo if it had been redirected. That startled me. Redirected? I asked. Priya shrugged. It happens, she said. People change address settings online, especially if they have access. My skin prickled. When I got home, I checked my online banking profile, now under my new password Marianne helped me create. And my breath caught. The mailing address on file was Jenna's home address. My statements had been going to her for months. I felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the way she'd been quietly moving pieces around me, like I was furniture. I sat at my kitchen table and made 2 piles of paper, one pile labeled mine and one pile labeled her access. I didn't write slogans. I didn't dramatize. I just sorted facts, dates, amounts, screenshots of her texts asking for transfers, the change of address date. I printed the emails from the credit union confirming password resets. I saved them in a plain manila envelope and slid that envelope into the red checkbook cover alongside Tom's old register pages. That cover, that little scuffed thing, became my traveling witness. In the middle of all this, life kept happening in ordinary ways. I picked up my grandson Liam from school one afternoon because Jenna texted that she was swamped. Liam climbed into my passenger seat with his backpack smelling like crayons and gym socks and said, "Grandma, Mom's mad at you." It came out simple, like a weather report. I gripped the steering wheel. "What did she say?" I asked gently. Liam shrugged. "She said you have money and you won't help, and you're being selfish," he said, then added, "She said old people don't need money anyway." The words, coming from an 8-year-old's mouth, nearly broke me. That was the middle echo, the reflected form of the insult, now turned into something Jenna was teaching my grandchildren like it was a fact of nature. I pulled the car over for a second and stared at the school parking lot, the kids running, the teachers waving, all of it so normal while my chest felt hollow. "Liam," I said softly, "do you know why I have money?" He shook his head. "Because Grandpa died," he guessed. My throat tightened. "Partly," I said, "but mostly because Grandpa and I worked for it and saved it so we wouldn't be scared when we got older." Liam looked out the window. "Mom says you don't do anything," he said. That one stung in a different way. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about being erased. If you've ever felt yourself becoming invisible in your own family, you know that ache. "I do things," I said quietly. "Maybe not the things she sees." Liam was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I like coming to your house because it's calm." That simple sentence was like a hand on my shoulder. When we got to my condo, I made him grilled cheese, and the smell of butter browning in the pan triggered another memory. Jenna, at 5 years old, sitting at the table, swinging her legs, chanting, "Cut it in triangles." Tom laughing, flipping the sandwich, calling her the boss. We'd indulged her then because she was little, and it was cute. Somewhere along the way, we'd kept indulging the boss part and forgotten to teach her that other people have boundaries. That evening, after Liam went home, I sat on my couch and listened to the oldies station Tom loved, the one that played Fleetwood Mac and James Taylor. A song came on, Fire and Rain, and I felt that familiar ache in my ribs where grief lives. I thought about how Tom used to handle Jenna's storms. He loved her, but he didn't let her run the house. After he died, Jenna stepped into the empty space like it was her inheritance too. Not just his money, but his role as the loud voice. I realized I'd been letting her because it felt like staying connected to him somehow. Like letting Jenna lead meant I wasn't alone. But loneliness is a strange advisor. It tells you to accept things you shouldn't. A week later, the letter came. Not from the bank, from the court. It was an official envelope with my name typed in stark black letters. I stood in my hallway holding it, my fingers numb, the paper heavier than it should be. I opened it at the kitchen table with the red checkbook cover beside me like a talisman. The heading read, Application for Guardianship of Property. Applicant, Jenna Hart. Subject, Diane Hart. I felt like I'd been punched. Jenna was claiming I was unable to manage my finances due to confusion and memory lapses. She requested that the court appoint her as guardian to protect my assets. Protect. The word looked obscene on the page. She also attached a statement from Kyle saying I'd been acting strangely and accusing family members without cause. I read it twice, my vision swimming. Then I did what I never would have done 10 years earlier. I didn't call Jenna. I didn't plead. I didn't try to talk her down. I called Priya. She filed, I said, and my voice was flat. Priya exhaled. Okay, she said. We respond. We bring your evidence. We request an independent assessment if needed. And we make it clear this is retaliation for you cutting off access. Retaliation. Yes, that was the word. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks sounds like a lot until you're living inside it. Those days became an organized, quiet audit of my life. I gathered everything, bank statements, access logs, screenshots of Jenna's texts. Transfer it now. Don't be weird. You'll forget anyway. The address change, the withdrawal receipts. I wrote a timeline on plain paper, not dramatic, just facts. I included Dr. Singh's assessment. I asked the credit union for a letter confirming I'd changed my password and revoked informal access. Marianne provided it without fuss. We will also attend if you request, she said, or we can provide an affidavit. Affidavit sounded like a word from TV, but this wasn't TV. This was my daughter trying to legally take my autonomy because she didn't like my no. During those weeks, Jenna alternated between rage and sweetness. She showed up at my door crying one day, mascara streaking, saying she was worried about me. Mom, you're spiraling, she said, looking around my tidy living room like she expected to find chaos. You need help. You're making enemies. You're going to end up alone. I'm already alone, I said softly, and that surprised her, because it was true, and she didn't know how to argue with it. Another day, she sent me a long email about family loyalty and what Dad would have wanted, as if Tom's ghost was her lawyer. I printed it and slipped it into my envelope. Facts, Diane, I told myself. Keep it factual. There was one night, 2 nights before the hearing, when I sat awake at my kitchen table with only the under-cabinet light on, the rest of the condo dark, and I felt the full weight of what was happening. It wasn't just money, It was my daughter publicly declaring I was incompetent. It was her trying to rewrite the story of my life into something convenient for her. I thought about all the times I'd made myself smaller to keep peace, all the times I'd said yes because I didn't want to be the difficult mother. Maybe you've done that too, swallowed your own discomfort because you thought love required silence. In the quiet, I held the red checkbook cover and ran my fingers over the worn leather. Another memory came, triggered by the feel of that scuffed corner. Tom's hands, rough from weekend carpentry projects, sliding a check into the cover after we paid off our mortgage. He'd looked at me and said, "We did it." I remember the relief in my body, the way my shoulders dropped. We did it. Not Jenna, not Kyle, Tom, and me. That night, I realized something slowly and clearly. Jenna wasn't asking for help. She was demanding ownership, and she was willing to label me confused to get it. The day of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like stale air and old paper. The hallways were too bright, the benches hard. I wore my best navy cardigan, the one Tom used to say made me look sharp, and I carried my red checkbook cover like it was my purse, though it was filled with documents instead of checks. Priya met me at the entrance. She looked calm, professional, like someone who had walked into this kind of room 100 times. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, but my hands were cold. Jenna arrived with Kyle 10 minutes later, both of them dressed like they were going to a job interview. Jenna's hair was smooth, her makeup perfect. She looked at me and smiled sadly, like I was a patient she pitied. That hurt more than the anger would have. "Mom," she said softly, stepping close, "this doesn't have to be ugly." Priya's presence beside me was like a wall. "It didn't," I said, "until you filed paperwork saying I can't run my own life." Jenna's eyes flashed. "You can't," she hissed under her breath. "You don't even know what you're doing. You're going to lose everything if you keep this up." Then, louder for Kyle's benefit, she said, "I'm just trying to protect you." Protect again. We were called into a small courtroom. It wasn't dramatic like TV, no pounding gavel, just a judge in a robe, a court clerk, and the quiet rustle of papers. The judge, Justice Allen, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back, looked down at us over her glasses. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She looked tired in the way people do when they've seen too many families try to turn the law into a weapon. Jenna spoke first, as the applicant. Priya had warned me Jenna would likely perform, and she did. She described me as forgetful, stubborn, paranoid. She said I'd been giving money away recklessly and accusing Jenna of theft without proof. She told a story about me losing my keys once and forgetting a doctor's appointment, as if those were legal grounds to remove my rights. Kyle nodded beside her like a trained assistant. When Jenna finished, she turned toward me with a small, satisfied smile, like she'd just nailed a presentation. Justice Allen looked at Priya. "Response?" she asked. Priya stood. "Your Honor, the respondent is present, lucid, and has documentation," she said. "This application was filed after Mrs. Hart revoked her daughter's access to her bank accounts due to unauthorized transfers. We have records from the financial institution, a medical assessment, and correspondence showing coercion." Jenna's smile faltered. Priya handed the clerk our packet. My red checkbook cover sat on the table beside me, open like a mouth that had finally decided to speak. Justice Allen reviewed the documents quietly. The room was so silent I could hear Jenna's breathing change, faster, thinner. The judge asked me a few questions directly. My address, my income sources, my understanding of my accounts. I answered calmly. The truth, when you're not hiding it, is surprisingly easy to say. Then Justice Allen looked at Jenna. "Ms. Hart," she said, "you allege your mother is incapable of managing property. Yet the bank records show repeated transfers from her account to an address associated with you, initiated through online access she states you set up." Jenna's face went pale. Those were with her permission," she stammered. "She just doesn't remember." Justice Allen's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in that precise way officials get when someone is trying to sell them fog. "The respondent has provided a recent cognitive assessment indicating she is competent," the judge said. "Do you have any independent medical evidence to the contrary?" Jenna glanced at Kyle, then back. "No," she said, voice tight. "But she's old," she blurted, and then, as if she couldn't stop herself, she added, "She doesn't need all that money. She just sits there. I'm trying to make sure it's used properly." There it was, the same ugly belief, now spoken in a courtroom, dressed up as concern. Old people don't need money. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my face still. Justice Allen leaned forward slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud. It was firm in a way that felt like something being stamped. "Guardianship is not a tool for reallocating an adult's assets to suit a relative's priorities," she said. "Age is not evidence, and need is not yours to define." The words hit the room like a door closing. Jenna's mouth opened, then shut. Kyle's eyes widened. I watched Jenna's expression shift. Shock first, then fear, then a kind of furious humiliation as she realized those sentences weren't just being said. They were being recorded, written down, on file. It wasn't just my word anymore. It was the court's. Justice Allen continued, "This application is denied. I am directing that a copy of these findings be provided to the financial institution, and I strongly recommend the applicant seek independent legal advice regarding her own conduct." Conduct. That was the cold, bureaucratic word for what Jenna had done to me. Jenna's cheeks flushed bright red, her perfect makeup suddenly looking like a mask slipping. She started to cry, quick, sharp tears, and said, "You're taking her side." Justice Allen didn't react. "I am applying the law," she said simply, "and the law does not remove a competent adult's rights because someone else wants control." Jenna's shoulders sagged as if someone had unplugged her. Kyle stared at the floor. I sat very still, my hands folded, and felt something inside me unclench that I hadn't even known was clenched. When we stepped back into the hallway, Jenna spun toward me, eyes wild. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. "You embarrassed me." I looked at her, really looked. Not my baby, not my little girl in pigtails demanding grilled cheese triangles. A grown woman who had tried to legally strip her mother of autonomy because she didn't like being told no. "You embarrassed yourself," I said quietly. Priya touched my elbow. "Let's go," she murmured. Outside, the air felt cleaner than inside the courthouse. I took a deep breath, the cold filling my lungs, and I thought, almost with surprise, Jenna said old people don't need money. The judge, it turned out, didn't share her opinion. Not because the judge thought I needed money for fun, but because the judge recognized something Jenna refused to see, that my money represented my choices, my safety, my right to live without being managed like a child. On the drive home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Grief sat beside me too, because nothing about this was the life I wanted with my daughter. But there was also a thin, steady line of relief running through me, like a new foundation poured under a cracked house. The next week, I met with Marianne again at the credit union. She had the court's findings on her desk, neatly filed. "This will be added to your account notes," she said. "Any future attempt by someone else to claim authority will be flagged." Flagged. Another official word that sounded like protection. We set up additional security, two-factor authentication, a verbal passphrase Jenna would never guess because it wasn't about her. We also changed my statements to paper delivery again, to my condo, in my name. I went to Priya's office and executed a new power of attorney document, not for Jenna, but for my younger sister, Elaine, who lived 2 towns over and had always been steady as a fence post. Elaine cried when I told her why. "I knew Jenna was intense," she said, carefully choosing her word. "I didn't know she'd go this far." I didn't either, I thought. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. Around that time, another memory came, triggered by the sound of my phone ringing. Jenna had always used the same ringtone since college. Some upbeat pop song that made me smile back then because it meant she was calling to tell me about her day. Now, when that ringtone played, my body tensed. I remembered a night years ago when Jenna was 17 and called me from a party, whispering, "Mom, can you come get me?" Tom had been asleep, but I'd thrown on a coat and driven out without hesitation. She'd stumbled into the car smelling like beer and hairspray, tears on her cheeks. "I made a mistake," she'd said. I'd taken her home, tucked her into bed, and sat on the edge of her mattress until she fell asleep, thinking, this is what mothers do. That night, I promised myself I'd always be her safe place. I kept that promise longer than was healthy. Safety, I realize now, isn't the same as surrender. Jenna didn't call for a while after the hearing. She texted once, a short message. "You ruined everything." I didn't respond, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't reopen the old dance. Kyle called 2 weeks later. His voice sounded strained. "Diane," he said, "Jenna's struggling. The boutique is closing. She's blaming you." I leaned against my kitchen counter, the phone warm against my ear. "Kyle," I said, "Jenna's boutique isn't closing because I protected my account. It's closing because it wasn't working." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "I know." He asked if I could help with the kids while they figured out childcare. That request, at least, was real and concrete, not a grab at my savings. I agreed to take Liam and his little sister, Harper, on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, 2 set days, not open-ended. It might sound small, but for me, it was a new kind of boundary, specific, chosen, not demanded. The first Tuesday, Harper ran into my condo shouting, "Grandma," and hugged my legs. Her hair smelled like strawberry shampoo. I made snacks, helped with homework, and when the kids were settled watching cartoons, I sat at my table and opened the red checkbook cover. Not because I needed to write checks. I barely used them anymore, but because it had become my marker of adulthood. I slid a fresh sheet of paper inside and wrote out my new monthly plan, condo fees, groceries, savings, and a small line I labeled Diane. Not for emergencies, not for Jenna, for me. I decided to put aside $50 a month for something I'd wanted for years, a weekend trip to Prince Edward County in the summer, just me and Elaine, to sit by the water and eat fish and chips without anyone asking me for anything. It wasn't about the money amount. It was about the choice. A few months later, Jenna showed up again. This time, she didn't sweep in like she owned the place. She stood in the doorway, shoulders slightly rounded, eyes tired. She looked older than 38. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back and let her. She sat on the couch and stared at her hands. "Kyle's mad," she said quietly. "He thinks I went too far." I waited. Jenna swallowed. "I was scared," she said, and her voice cracked. "The store was failing, and I didn't know how to fix it. And when you stopped helping, it felt like you were abandoning me." There was the raw truth under all her entitlement, fear. I could have softened into that and given her what she wanted. But I'd learned something important. Understanding someone's fear doesn't obligate you to fund it. "I didn't abandon you," I said. "I stopped you from using me as a solution without asking." Jenna flinched. "I didn't think of it like that," she whispered. I thought you had it, and I needed it." I took a breath. "Jenna," I said, "when you say things like, 'Old people don't need money,' you're saying my future doesn't matter. You're saying my safety is optional." Her eyes filled. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. I nodded slowly. "But that's what it means," I said. She sat with that, silent. After a minute, she said, "Are you going to forgive me?" That question landed heavy. Maybe you've been asked to forgive before the other person has really understood what they did. "I'm willing to have a relationship," I said carefully. "But it will be different now." Jenna looked up, wary. "Different how?" "No access to my accounts," I said. "No decisions about my life made without me. And if you need help, you ask in a way that respects me." Jenna's jaw tightened, that old reflex to argue, but then she exhaled. "Okay," she said, voice small. It wasn't a magical transformation. It was a beginning. She left after 20 minutes, not hugging me, just a quiet bye. I stood at my window, watching her walk to her car. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like I'd finally put my own name back on my life. In the months that followed, my days became calmer in ways I hadn't expected. Without Jenna's constant financial emergencies, my phone rang less. I joined a Wednesday morning walking group at the community center, mostly women in their 60s and 70s, all of us in good sneakers, all of us carrying our own stories. We walked slowly around the indoor track, talking about grandkids, arthritis, grief, and sometimes carefully about adult children who blurred lines. One woman, Sharon, told me, "My son tried to get me to sign over my car. I told him I'm not dead yet." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. If you're listening and you've ever felt like your usefulness is being measured more than your humanity, I want you to know something. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone. The court hearing didn't fix my family. It did something quieter. It created a record. It put a line in a system that doesn't care about tears or guilt trips. It meant that if Jenna ever tried again, if she ever decided my autonomy was negotiable, there would already be a file that said otherwise. And it changed me, not into someone hard, into someone clearer. One afternoon, almost a year later, I took the red checkbook cover out again to update my little Diane plan, and I noticed the leather was softer where my fingers always held it. It had absorbed my fear, my grief, my resolve. I thought of Tom. How he would have hated what Jenna did, but how proud he would be that I stood up in that courtroom and spoke calmly anyway. I made myself tea in my favorite chipped mug, sat at my table, and looked around my quiet condo. Quiet didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like room to breathe. Jenna still had moments. She'd still ask for favors, like she was entitled, and I'd still have to remind her of the new rules, but she no longer spoke about me like I was a wallet with legs. The judge's words had done something my pleading never could. They made it official that my life was mine. And when I think back to that day at the credit union, Jenna leaning over the counter saying, "Old people don't need money," I don't hear it the same way anymore. I hear it as the moment she revealed how she saw me. And I hear the answer too, not shouted, not emotional, just coldly fair, spoken by a woman in a robe who had no reason to protect my feelings, only my rights. Guardianship is not a tool for reallocating an adult's assets to suit a relative's priorities. Age is not evidence, and need is not yours to define. That sentence lives somewhere in a courthouse file now, and it lives in me. If you've stayed with me all the way through, thank you, truly. I know stories like this can stir up your own memories, and I hope you're being gentle with yourself as you listen. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your little corner of the world, because I love picturing us all scattered across the map, keeping each other company in the quiet hours. And if you enjoy life stories like mine and you'd like to help me keep sharing them, you can tap the Super Thanks button under this video. It's a small gesture that helps more than you might think. On your screen, you should see a couple more stories I picked out for you if you want to stay a while longer. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take good care of your hearts. And please take good care of yourselves too.